In this series, what I wanted to do was go through how to foreshorten to see if we can put together a more coherent system, step by step, of foreshortening so that those of you that want to be tackling these more challenging or difficult poses can do so. What are those steps? What are you going to find in this video or in this series? 1, begin with the core. Treat the core as a series of form intersections. So here I'm just talking about head, neck, rib cage, waist, pelvis. That's going to be its own thing. I'm inspired or was inspired by the Burne Hogarth Dynamic Anatomy book. There was a significant section on foreshortening that I was always kind of fascinated by, except his are like 15 rules for how to do it or for what to look for. But because I'm way lazier, I'm going to try to get it into 3 things to think about to help organize these poses. And then each step can kind of be broken down or subdivided into specialized skills or techniques so that you can hopefully develop a better sense of how to tackle these. To work through that, let's first depict that in a general mannequin. So what is it that I'm thinking about organizing in a more challenging view? So when I look at my my alternative gesture and I say, oh, the head's an egg, the neck is a cylinder, and then the rib cage and pelvis can really be this like long tube shape. And then, this is kind of that dumb Riley method in the way that I discuss it. Dumb because I don't really understand Riley method. So it's just going to be this dumb tube shape that gives me a width and a height. And then here, I could later subdivide that into form. So you could do the subdivision, or you could just leave it as the cylinder or the longer mannequin. But the reason I prefer this method when I'm tackling more complex poses instead of the gestural one, right? The rhythmic, the movement, the flow, is that one doesn't lend itself as easily towards something that can be stacked, something that can express and show those overlapping forms really well. So this is going to be what I'm working from or using. The only rule coming, because this is step 1, is that I'm working out from the core. The rule here is that I'm going to begin with whatever is closest, with whatever one is closest. And I'm going to forget all the things that I think I know about proportion. So forehead's wide, this is the sternum is that big, this is the division of space between rib cage and pelvis. All of that I'm not going to think about it. So let's just start and see if we can play around with this one here. So these are great reference pictures from Studio Graphic that I'm working with, developing a little pamphlet for you guys on foreshortening, so you can have something to hold on to, right, as you study these references and look at the information that I'm trying to share to make this a bit easier. I'm going to start with this head, and that's going to set up my scale. So I'm going to think of this line as the front of the face, and I'm going to try to depict it, in as few lines as possible. I just want to be starting with the shapes. So chin, this is the front plane. This is my design or enveloping line for that top plane. Here's the jawline. I'm thinking this is shooting towards that ear. And then I'm just going to wrap it up and back to give where I would see maybe, so the ear's here, wrapping up and back to the cranium. Okay, done. I'm going to leave it as a series of blocked shapes for now, because what I want with the core, I want to be able to take what was so nicely laid out in a 2D shape, flat plan or map here, and start to push it backwards. Right? The goal is to just kind of set up that landscape effect of one form resting comfortably in space and moving away, right? With this diminished sense of scale and then the clarity of the T overlap. So as we go through this, there's a few things that I want to think about. I need to keep the T's as clear as possible. So the T's would be this. And then, to help push these forms a little bit, what I can add is the wrap, right? We can start to describe some of the surface contour of each form if it helps. And then we'll talk about form intersections, right? So let me just write them all here so you have that all laid out. T overlap, wrap. And the last thing is that the joining of these forms, right? You might want to come back and join each one with a form intersection, which just means that you're describing how each form merges, kind of blends or melds together. Okay, enough talking. So next I'm going to look at, let's put one of these on, right? So I have a singular form, so I'm going to do a little wrap. I'm going to use the brow line. So I think I'd be seeing the brow doing that, and then here's the top of the head. So in terms of describing each form, right, I like to wrap it. And then if I can, one thing that I'll use is a center line or a symmetry line to help give it turn. So notice how each one of these does something a little bit different. The wrap describes the general orientation in terms of space, over, under. Right, so that's what the wraps do. That's the modifying element or characteristic that they give. The center line is the degree to which that form is rotated. So that's not unlike what I did with my mapping-based kind of gestural system there. So we'll keep doing that as we go through each one. Okay, next is that, okay, the neck. Great, that looks horrible. What am I supposed to do with that? Okay, so I don't really know, but I'm going to just identify now my part. But so I'm just thinking about that column. And I'm going to, because I'm just really thrown by what I would expect in something that's standing or just a more natural position, I'm going to look at negative shape. So I think that the neck would start somewhere around here, and then that comes up. All right, so what I'm thinking about is the area in which the second part connects and or hits the first. So that's the benefit of starting with that large shape, is that I use it to progressively kind of build back. Now, if I judge where the neck is here, it's very near to the back. So let's say here somewhere. Right? And that does look like a big neck, but it is kind of contorted or bent in a way that I think that would be correct. Okay, so that's my shape or my part. Now, what you can do now is, because this is all still part of part one, this core, is I can just kind of cut it and say, all right, well, I'm going to deal with the 3D stuff later. But if you want, you could just keep it as, C and an S here. This is a pinch. That's a stretch still for me. Or you could start to look for, right, your three big things here. Three big things being, how is it overlapping? There's a T. Here's a T. That creates a continuity of depth, right, or a continuation of how I'm exploring depth and pushing the eye back. And I can also give it a wrap. So this is going away, maybe like this, my best guess. You could reference my earlier video on wrapping lines for how I'm doing that, if that's something that you'd like to review. And the last thing is there a center line, right? So remember I did this symmetry line or center line for the form to help rotate it. And I think here, what I'd actually be seeing is maybe the spine. And that just helps me get a sense of what that ultimate rotation would be. Right? So remember, the wrap is always over, under. The center line is the degree to which a form is rotating in space. Done. All right, so check it off the list. Done, done. All right, now let's look for rib cage, or you could treat this singular area as one thing. Or you could do the whole rib cage, pelvis, waist as that large tube. I think I'm going to break them up. So let's do, okay, so I'm going to make a block. Rib cage block is here. I'm kind of taking where I see it intersect against the neck and then up to the breast. That looks like it's the top plane. And then it's going to go back. This is the side. I think this is the side plane of the rib cage. Now, when I look at the rib cage, I don't think it ends any further past the neck, right? So if I do something like that, so this is a little bit early on, but it's important to discuss just so you know what I'm doing as I move through. That would just be a plumb line, right? Like a sighting line, where I'm basically creating a de facto grid with straights, diagonals, or horizontals, where I can judge the placement of one form against another. So I'm gonna rework that shape a little bit. Here's the rib cage. It comes back. This is the side, and the side ends, it doesn't go too much further than that guideline that I set up for myself. This is the part of foreshortening that I think is, one, fascinating, and two, frustrating as all hell, right? Because it's taking what you understand and it's smashing it down into these really small incremental jumps and positions between form. As a warning, what I usually find that people do when working through these is the opposite. Instead of condensing or bracketing each form to a smaller localized shape, we make them longer, right? Like each foreshortened form instead gets longer and longer, which I think is an interesting, it's the counter to what we should be doing. So intuitively, it's strange that our brains want to do that. Okay, so let's wrap it. This one I would say is really pushing away. Maybe that's the perspective. Just as a reminder, remember wrapping lines are generic shorthands for how I visualize a form moving in space. they are cross contours to a cylinder. So if I'm doing this, right, it doesn't matter that it's perfect. We don't have to be, the ellipse champion here. We just want something that is uh, giving us enough to read, develop it more. Here's the spine. So that would be where I think the center line is, right? So review. Each form has gotten a defined shape. When I had more than one, the shape wrapped, overlapped. So that maybe I could do that better here. How is that overlapping? Overlapping. And then I looked at a center line to try to understand early on the degree to which a form is turning or rotating in space. All right, let's look to see if there's any waste here. That's a horribly drawn arrow. Let's do a nicer one. So this area. Okay, so what is visible of the waist? I think it's kind of where the rope is hugging. So let's use that as an indication. One thing I'll do, as I work through the core here, is I'm going to give it a harder or sharper line. I find that can be helpful sometimes is to use texture in these really collapsed areas of space to show difference. So hard versus soft. And I'm going to do a little line like this. I'm going to try to use like a softer stroke. This to me is the waist. And actually what I'm just using that rope to describe the way it turns across the oblique or that side, and then it's going to come back and hit right in front of where that arm would be. So there's my, right, so let's label them at the core. 1, 2, 3, 4. We got 4 out of 5, which is pretty great. I'm almost done. Now let me double check this. Does it have a T overlap? Yeah. Does it wrap? Yeah, it's building with this. And by the way, this would be the form intersection, is how is the neck, the rib cage, the waist, any of these forms, how is it in terms of the three-dimensional qualities connecting and plugging into the one before or after? Now, you don't always have to do that, but that's the core kind of skill that would be, or the core technique that I think is most useful to use when kind of working your way back through this initial step. And then 5. So pelvis. What's pelvis up to? God only knows. So let's do a pelvis. I'm just going to outline a shape. I think it hits here. That's my T. Here's the side. I'm going to make a block. Right, so I'm really just trying to emulate my little cascading quality of spheres there. Comes across, comes back. Each one of these shapes, remember, is a generalization. So it's not like when I'm doing this, I'm saying, okay, front, and then here's where the great trochanter. So it doesn't have to be that organic. I'd prefer it wouldn't be. And then down, and I would guess, so this is definitely coming down. Let's say it meets up maybe a little bit lower. Let's do it here. So the reason I'm moving my line from this to this is that would create a tangent with that waist. Right, so I think I'm just going to favor it a little bit further and do something like that. So we have this down. Okay, so that's going to be my shape. I feel like each one reads as it goes back. So that checks out. I could double check proportion by doing more siding. I think in this one, I could have been more careful if I sided the back of that head. See if I raise this line up, double check it here. I think my pelvis might go a little too far back. So that might be something I could work on is bringing this shape in some, but I feel mostly good about it for now. So let's do, where's the back? Okay, so this would be the center line. Like if I'm looking for the sacrum or the center line of the pelvis, that would be my form there. And that's giving me this whole back. So what I'm seeing in this is, regardless of the position of the head, I'm seeing 3/4 back, right, from the top view. So, that would help me in terms of maybe I just introduce a corner to all of these to help make a little bit more sense of what I always find to be really challenging to see, which is, top versus side. Step 1 done. I mean, there's a lot here to try to tackle, but what you should remember is when you're dealing with poses like this, the first thing is take your core, remember your shapes, the 5 shapes, and then begin with the largest one, and then work back from there with a focus on shape, overlap, wrapping line, and then defining the turn of that form with the center. And then after the fact, you can go through and like this would be coming and really trying to make clear how each one intersects with the others. Step 2 would be the limbs themselves. So I'm going to make my limbs one whole step, and let's describe them up here a little bit so that you can get a comfortability with how I'm talking about limbs. Limbs are going to be all over the place, figuratively and literally. So the way that I would tackle these as far as a series of steps is I always look at what I have and then try to find a 2D straight, right? Or this is a two-dimensional angle that just communicates the placement and orientation of a limb. That's it. So you could just start by doing that. And it's a way of, again, collapsing difficulty into a small step so that we don't lose our mind with all of the challenges of this pose. So let's say I'm starting it there. I just drew a sphere so that you could see where I'm starting. I'm going to organize this arm by saying humerus goes this direction. And then I could do some of the same things. I could try to manage, try to get a sense of where this arm ends versus the head, et cetera, et cetera. Or maybe let's do, here's the knee. The knee is at this angle and it's going this far past the torso. The ankle to foot is here and it goes at this angle this far past the pelvis. The humerus on the other side comes from the other side of the rib cage, which would be over here. It comes back and exists behind that first line that I drew or started with. The radius ulna continues in this trajectory, right, and then would go onto the image. The radius and ulna here breaks a little bit, and then there's this really cool visual connection between the hands. I hope you could see how that, let's call that step A underneath number 2, how that just starts to plot out and give you the ability to see the relationships between the limbs. The second part of that is, what is the 2D shape? Okay, so I've already minimized some of the complexity by just looking at the angle and the length. So that's part of the foreshortening. The next step would be, well, what's the shape? So the shape, I'm going to use that initial angle to design. So let's say our shape is this, or it could be whatever, but if we're doing a limb, it's likely going to be this. In anatomy classes, we always talk about how your limbs are just drumsticks, right? It's 2/3 mass or muscle to 1/3 bone. So, or you can make it simpler, just make it one cylinder. Like, for example, here, I know the length, the angle. So on top of that, I'm just going to create my shape. So that's done. But the reason I always start with step A, or the length and the angle, is so that I can focus on the degree to which it's foreshortened or not. And let's do it for a few. Right? Let's do it for this foot. Maybe I want to give more of a foot shape to this. So the length angle line, or A, gives me a center line to work from so that I can design a two-dimensional shape on top a little bit more confidently. Here's the knee shape. But at this stage, what else am I doing? Well, I'm connecting back with my early steps, my core techniques, T overlaps. I haven't done wraps yet, so I'm just doing T overlaps. So that sits there. Now, if I did this humerus, I'd want to start to look at the negative shapes, right? Because if I get, which I don't think I've done a great job of, but if I get this triangle, which is the in-between shape of those limbs, then I've placed both the limbs, the neck, the head correctly, in theory. Okay, so this one's going to stop here. So that tells me how to overlap them. This is in front, that's behind. And then, right, we could go into the forearms. I'm gonna leave it, so I don't want to draw over the photo reference. So forearm would be going back this way. I'm noticing that kind of kick back off the humerus at a different angle. Forearm to hand goes this way. And so that begins to plot out the movement. Oh, I could do a little foot shape over here. Back a little foot back here, Bob Ross style. And that just looks like that. So you don't have to make it any more foot than how I've drawn it. C, an option, right? So you could stop there if you're happy with that, and that's as far as you want to take it. But C would be the same steps. So let's go through those steps. Angle, length, shape. And now I'm going to start to incorporate wraps. So that gives me one more piece of information. Is it going toward or away? So we could say it's going away, or whatever it is. Right, so going that way. And so I could take that and now start to work that on top of each one. Now, if you're a little bit more advanced and you don't need all of the steps, then you don't need all the steps. As always, everything that I try to lay out is just so that everybody, right, that might struggle like me, as the best opportunity of making sense of this. But ideally, you might find a little shortcut or a way to be a bit more expedient with the information. And that could give you a better sense of developing a economical workflow that meets your skill level a bit. And you just do that by collapsing the steps down. Let's do one more or a few more. So that this arm here goes this way. So that's the perspective wrap. That's the quarter away. You could do the foot. You could do this leg. And then piece by piece, I start to get a description of space through the limbs for how they're moving around the core. But the core for me is that anchor where we really explain the contraction of space that the pose has taken or described. Let's do a little forearm action here. So that goes this way into the hand. Sorry, forearm, I didn't give you enough room. And then the hand goes the forearm goes this way. And then we'd have that really cool looking shape for the hand being pushed out. Last, for this, so 4 steps, A, B, C, D, would be to do the same thing I did on the head, which is to come back and find that cornering. Right? Remember when I did the center line? So for the limbs, they're asymmetrical parts, so they may not there's not going to be clear center line. So what I do is I just look for a corner. So here's all the things. Let's make sure that's comprehensive. Now let's do another line. So unlike this center line, right, we don't have to have the same exact center line, but depending on the turn, D is about, can you see a rotation front side? And sometimes that can be similar, but sometimes you could look for shadow, right? You could find one line wherever you think you see a transition from front to side that will help give this a bit more specificity for perspective. So let's do it on one. With the arm, upper arm, I can kind of see the back to the side. I see the tricep to the side of the arm. So I'm going to put a line here. And so that would start to plane the arm. So that would turn it from what would be an average kind of cylindrical build to something that might have a clearer back side or back outside in this case. Do we need to go this extra step? Ultimately, that's up to you. But I would use it for having the clearest description of surface possible so that I could layer on top my anatomy, right? Anatomy would be like the last thing that softens this form, right? So right now we're just focusing on the construction. And you could do that for each one. Let's do it on this one too. Here it's pretty close to my 2D line. So I'm just gonna start to plane that off. So maybe in this knee, we could see that. Let's see it with the foot. See how the foot has that clear side bottom. And then maybe I could do it on this one. I would see a cornering here. So that to me looks like a outside and back or inside and back. And that's it. Right? So those are my first 2 steps out of my lay-in for a foreshortened pose that helps me keep it managed, break it down slowly. The 3rd step would be I don't trust myself step. You may or may not have to do. But my 3rd step is always a double check. So because I don't trust myself. In this step, what I'm looking to do is really just come in and allow the drawing to get a double check. And the way that I would begin to double check this is with some of the techniques we already covered or talked about. Those would be the sighting lines, the plumb lines, the positive, negative shapes, right? So that I place or I double check the positioning of all of the forms already there. So the meat of the technique or the hard stuff is steps 1 and 2, taking that core, pushing it back in space. Step 2 is the limbs, which you have 4 steps to organize and place each. And then the last is just making sure that you double check. Use 3 techniques. Use plumb lines, like I already covered, positive and negative shapes, and then maybe use one form, like the head, to measure the whole. So hope this helps as a first kind of foray into how to discover and construct a foreshortened pose. And best of luck with practice. I'm going to put out a few more of these so that you can see the approach dealt with in a few other positions.